What up, Lorna Dune? So nice to be podcasting with you as opposed to just not podcasting and talking, working on projects. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here on your podcast. Big
Yeah.
fan.
Oh, well, thank you. Just as a general introduction, Lorna is someone I've known for a while from back in the Portland days. Uh, you are
hmm
partnered up with Keith Sweaty, who we did the Karen album with, who people might be familiar with. And um, recently, we worked on a book of sheet music, which is super fun. It'll be coming
Yep.
out piano, solo
hmm
piano, sheet music, and you're a total genius at taking songs that are not solo piano and making them into playable pieces like Prana and Limitations and Grandmother's Fear. So excited for that offering very soon. But we kind of got reconnected because you did some string arrangements, these brilliant string arrangements for the Possible album.
Yeah.
And I wanted to talk to you now. Well, the excuse to talk was like we submitted a couple of those songs for Grammy consideration, particularly the song Undying, which we put it in
Yeah.
the category of best contemporary classical score, which is a bit of a niche, but I thought like it actually is perfect for that because it truly is contemporary
Yeah.
classical. And I want to ask
Definitely.
you, um, tell me a bit about that process of writing strings for that. I know it just started with me writing some piano and some very simple, sort of basic arrangements. And then I really intentionally wanted you to just roll with it because I should say, you also did the string arrangement on Hearts Are One, which is the last song on Karen. And I remember when you were
Oh,
doing
I
that
love that track.
out in the, Keith and I were working on a song and you were out there. I was like, I think you did it in one day. And, like, it was really cool.
When you feel it, you feel it.
Yeah. And I remember on the deluxe version, we released a version that was just strings and piano because we were in the studio and like sort of accidentally hit solo on those. We're like, this sounds really sick. And anyway, I could sit here and talk for a
Was it
long time, but
accidental?
yeah. But tell us about
Aw.
this. People really responded to that Undying song, and it was one that was really, really special to
Have
me. And so I
they?
just, yeah, yeah. And I want to hear like what
Oh,
your
that's
process
great.
was, like, doing that end of it on your own. And then when we came back together, of course.
Oh, well, it's been such a journey, first of all, with some of these earlier tracks that we got to work on together. And I feel like it was a natural progression to this album possible. And um, I really appreciate the platform to be able to explore strings. They're such unique instruments, and
Mm-hmm.
growing up as a pianist, I love strings, but I use hammers, not bows. But
Mm.
I've been working within the new classical scenes in New York City and then in Portland for a while, and have been able to work with some wonderful players that have shown me some of the possibilities of the instrument.
Yeah.
Um, Heading to Undying, I just come off of the last gig that I had before the pandemic, which was with the San Francisco Symphony Orchestra in their Soundbox Theater, which is next to their concert hall. And the theme of that evening was creating a modern sanctuary. And the warehouse had 85 speakers embedded in it, which was unbelievable. And I was lucky enough to play with um, moving sounds around the space, doing ASMR sounds, nature sounds, ambient music, in addition to this wonderful programming, which included one of my favorite composers that really influenced the orchestration of Undying, which is John Luther Adams. I don't know if are you familiar with that composer? He's from
I'm not.
Alaska originally.
No.
Oh man,
Living?
you got to check out his music. One of the best living composers. He is very influenced by the sounds of nature and translates that into a lot of his writing, especially strings. And you can hear the sort of whispers of the wind through the strings and the rushing rivers. And so I was able to be immersed in this sort of string writing in San Francisco. And then you asked me to do this arrangement the pandemic was hitting pretty hard. I was in my parents' house, and my father had just contracted COVID. It was a really
Mm.
emotional time. Um, a lot of things to process, and what came out was, this longing and grief and beauty, and trying to connect it all back to being part of nature. So in the string writing, you'll hear in the beginning a lot of extended technique string bow motions, which kind of is supposed to emulate the wind. And I hope that translates at least.
We had only 3 players, and it was a group called the 208 Ensemble in Boise. And so I kind of told you, I was like, look, we have 3 people, we have cello, viola, violin, and we can stack it and record it multiple times, which we did. We ended up settling on like 3 passes, so it's like 9 players.
I
And
know I couldn't get enough strings. I
well,
wanted to make an
I feel
orchestra.
you. I feel you. And but it was actually like quite difficult to record. Um, Not because anything you did, it's just like it has these long tones, but it has those sort of a lot of really
Hmm.
high violin things. And Jeff, who's playing the violin, did great. But it's like we ended up like recording some of it as ensemble bits and some of it like individually. And then I remember when I went to mix it, oh my God, I think I had like, essentially after various doublings, like 50 string tracks. And I'm just having to make sense of it and color
Yeah.
coding. And it took me 9 hours to get like one of the first mix of that one song. Um, but
Sorry. I
well,
was
it's worth
feeling
it.
the
It's worth it.
complexities, The wind isn't just one string, it's many of them.
Yeah. No, no. And it's interesting you say that though. I'm interested in checking out this composer you mentioned because it sounds like there's elemental like nature elements reflected in the music. And the song itself, like I really wanted to make a piece where the piano was very simplistic and minimal and in the middle and sort of did this repeating pattern and then everything was swimming around that. And
Hmm.
this hit the tone because and I wanted it to have sort of an emotional upswelling but like a darkness and a lightness at the same time, you know? It's
Yeah,
like
exactly. We've
that
been
undying feel
trying to
like it's
balance that.
yeah.
Yes,
So I
that's.
think
I
it's a
listened back to.
really interesting score, and that's why I thought it was a good one
Oh,
to feature. Yeah,
yeah. It really was um, trying to find balance between lightness and darkness, and without, you know, detracting from either side. Just being at stillness with that balance.
yeah. So you and I were both in New York City, and you were pretty deep in the contemporary classical scene, if I remember correctly. And you when you left, we met in Portland, actually, of all places. And I remember like you having a sense of longing for like the scene you were in there, and you've made your way now to Wisconsin, and from the outside looking in, I feel like you've really flourished since you've moved there. Like, you've really
Oh, thanks.
well, you've just seemed like you're really doing a lot of cool things and like making cool music and working with cool people and like um I remember when we were in Portland, I just heard you say a lot you missed New York. And I'm like, I don't feel like you miss New York right now. And
Yeah.
do you feel like you're in a groove?
Um, I feel like I've sort of decentralized from a city location,
Yeah,
now that I've been working online, I work for a music production company in Brooklyn. I'm still in contact with some amazing artists and collaborators in Portland. I don't know. I'm sure, so many people have transitioned their lives to being online that my,
totally.
my process of finding community has kind of changed a bit. I wish I was a little bit more connected with my immediate community, and I'm really excited to start exploring what's here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin that wasn't here 15 years ago when I left for New York. Been playing some noise shows, which has been fun. It seems like that's been a flourishing scene here. Still haven't found the ambient kids though. But yeah,
No,
I mean, New York had a really special new classical scene that was is always going to be tied to my experience of my 20s and working with some amazing voices like Missy Mazzoli and Tristan Parrish, and just being a part of a movement, being a
Yeah.
part of a movement that had been passed down by previous composers, like the Bang on a Can composers who had started this process of really breaking down the walls of the concert hall and totally upending what we think of concert music. That felt really special. It still is.
Well, tell me about this noise scene. Like, what are the things going on in Milwaukee that feel edgy for you? I mean, when you say noise, does that mean non-melodic, or does it mean? Because I went to a noise show once in Portland, by the way, and it was
Mm-hmm.
like intentionally trying to like get everyone to run out of the room. It was like, how long can people last? And I was just blown away. I was like, holy cow, this is intense.
You think
Tell me
that's what
about
their
what it's like out
intention
there.
was?
I don't know, but it was like there was just the loudest, like scratchiest, most intense sounds, for a long time.
Yeah. Well, I have my ambient side, which loves drones, and sometimes those drones can be healing, and sometimes they can be healing through stillness, and sometimes they can be healing through more intense timbres or mediums. So at this noise show that I just played, I'll just give you a little taste of like the variety of stuff I was there. There's one guy that had a sheet that had pickup mics, DIY pickup mics on, and was processing that. So just, a lot of experiments through medium. There's somebody else who had created their own noise app on an iPad, and then they were creating feedback loops from their iPad through an amplifier. So it's a lot of experimentation, and I think there's a lot of anger and emotion and intensity that can be released, and I found that with my performance as well. Although I was the only kid on the set that had a melody, which I was a little self-conscious about.
I
I'm
love
a
I
sucker
love
for a
that.
good melody,
Yeah, you
but
do.
you can have melody and noise, and it's totally fine.
That
It's
sounds like
just
life.
different parts of the rainbow. Hmm. Yeah, something that's more textural, I guess. Textural, medium based, experimental. Um, I like those sort of thinkers.
Would you feel that your moniker and identity as the artist Lorna Dune is expanding? And where do you feel like you're at and heading to compared to where you were at before?
Hmm. That's a good question. I think we're always evolving and changing all the time. Whether it's intentional or not, I don't know if it really matters. I'm just on this journey trying to process what I'm learning through my music, and there's an element that hasn't changed. Some of my more sci-fi leaning rhetorics or investigations of physics of sound or metaphysical properties of sound, like that hasn't changed, although it moved from a more techno leaning expression to more ambient lately. It still kind of all comes from the same place for me. um, so yeah, I think I am evolving and not at the same time. Does that make sense?
Well, tell me more about like the metaphysical leanings that you feel. There's a thread there, but I mean, you've told me offline that that's a growing interest of yours, and I'm curious, like more specifically, what interests you? Like, what is that? What are the things musically that are interesting you that you feel are metaphysical?
I mean, music in itself is a very metaphysical thing.
No doubt.
Thinking about the Big Bang and the primordial Om, and thinking of us being made of stardust and being part of this ancient reverberation of the original sound wave. It's very magical. It's very metaphysical, and also in the physical aspect, just thinking about healing properties of sound as well. I've been doing a lot of sound baths and doing binaural beats and exploring that sort of therapy as well, and really trying to put an investigative hat on to explore what is it about these sounds that are healing. What, we should be able to study these things. I love to experience them, but what is it about 432 hertz that is so pure, that's so healing to the body? These are questions that I love researching, and starting to put into my work as well. I'm starting to break away from equal temperament as well, and starting to go into more just intonation, and exploring other scale modes, and thinking about ancient Gregorian chant modes, and that sort of, not necessarily esoteric, just historical uh, properties of sound and how they've developed, and thinking about how polyphony developed, and um, what
Hmm.
is it about collective chants and collective singing that aids in, depersonalization of ego and transcendence. All these questions are just so fascinating to me, and I'm sure you can relate.
Yeah, that's perfect. This is now I have a couple of questions. Let's pick these apart piece by piece. Let's start with 432. So, some listeners
Oh boy.
maybe know what that is and some don't, but I mean essentially let's just say there's infinite frequencies in the universe, and we
Mm-hmm.
have we tune most things to the note A being 440, and some people tune it to 432, and some people think that tuning. Are you saying like that particular hertz, like actual 432 is a tone you find particularly healing, or you like this idea of tuning everything down, like tuning instruments
It's
down to
not so much
432?
me. It's been said that 432 is the universal frequency, and I'd like to understand that more. I'm not claiming to know anything. I'm just really into this research mode of what is it about 432 hertz that's so magical. I love seeing patterns of sound in water or other liquids. You can even have what's called a Chladni plate, where you have a metal plate with sand or salt
Yeah.
on, and a vibrating source. And at 432 hertz, there's a beautiful, beautiful geometric shape that emerges. And specific frequencies, as you do your sine tone sweep, can actually create these beautiful geometric patterns. And if you compare 440 to 432, it's unbelievable to see the difference in the actual patterns of sound through matter, and to think about my body is matter. My body is made up of what percentage are we of water? Like, this is the shape that is actually affecting my physical body as I'm experiencing sound. So it just becomes so much more than, my Spotify playlist that I listen to while I'm doing the dishes. This is thinking about direct, impactful physical, emotional changes through sound.
Well, I think one of the questions I have is like, let's say, yes, the cymatics, you look at that pattern of that particular tone and it looks more beautiful, perhaps, than 440. But when you start adding in harmony to it, like lots of notes and the relationship of those ratios, like a fifth, for instance, and
Mm-hmm.
that to me is where the magic would be. So if you think about temperaments, or how those ratios, like how exact they are, shall we say, versus not exact, would be more important in my mind, because any song, more than likely, it's not just one tone. And things like the human voice or a string instrument or anything that's fretless, where essentially like you're making these micro adjustments with your voice unintentionally, so to speak, where you might be singing in a perfect fifth or not, depending on how you want to sing with other people, like these chants. And regardless of where they're tuned to, it's more about like those ratios. What do you think about that?
Totally. Yes. Well, it's both, because you have to have a fundamental frequency before you have your harmonic overtone series. And then throughout the overtone series, that indicates the ratios in which we perceive consonance and dissonance. going back to those Gregorian church modes, originally like minor seconds and sevenths weren't allowed in to be
Right.
sung in churches.
Devil
It's
tones.
crazy to
Yeah,
think about. I know. But it goes back to simple math, really. I mean, so
exactly.
the perfect fifth and the perfect fourth are some of the most simple ratios that you could have from one fundamental frequency. And yeah, the complexity of the human voice is so amazing to think about. And also our hearing too. I was reading about perceived loudness, that within a specific range of human hearing, it doesn't matter if it's slightly quieter, we will perceive that specific frequency range as being louder. Um, we're just, our brains are primed to be able to communicate with one another, and so we actually naturally hear around 3K as louder than other frequencies. Isn't that fascinating?
Wait a minute. You're saying you hear when you say 3K, you mean like within a spectrum of sounds, something in the 3K range, like 3,000 kilohertz. That's where you're going to pick up the most. That's kind of where speech is too,
Yeah,
though.
exactly. That's exactly it. So
Okay,
we perceive the frequency range where human speech lives as being louder. It's
gotcha.
fascinating.
It must be where my
Yeah.
mother's voice is, right at 3K, because she just cuts through a crowd. And
Aw.
she was a kindergarten teacher, man. You could hear her. Didn't matter how many people were in the room. That's all you'd hear is my mom. Um, but let's
Aw.
go a little
I loved
further with
listening to
this.
your mom's voice. When we were doing the piano transcriptions, what was the piece that you had a sample of your mother
She's
speaking?
on The Simple Things, which is an old song from the
Yeah.
Education of the Individual Soul. She's on a song called Pacific Coast Highway. They weren't that amused that I had recorded conversations with them and thrown them on a record, but they quickly got over
Oh
it. They're like,
no.
"Oh, whatever. You're such a weirdo, always recording people and putting it in songs."
It's
But
beautiful.
I think it's really beautiful human moment, you know. Um,
Yes, definitely.
yeah, but just to finish up this conversation on tunings and stuff, because I know I get a lot of questions about this, and so I think it's worthwhile to kind of get into the weeds.
Yeah.
If you think about the piano too, and when the piano was introduced, that's when everyone had to sort of tune around it, and we started getting into like it's kind of the piano player's fault because I can't change very easily on a regular piano the tunings of it and so forth. And then ironically, I used to my older East Forest music, I would tune my Nord keyboard sharp 12 cents to 444 because I also read that was
Why?
another because there was the 432 was far too dramatic. If I tuned down to that, everything sounded just weird. And it was too far to go for the sounds to be stretched essentially. And if I went up,
Sure.
I also heard that up in that zone, like a lot of older European orchestras were in that zone, and I just read some stuff about that also being an interesting zone for um,
Hmm.
healing properties. But it's really just like getting outside the box, like Jimi Hendrix tuning down or the Beatles changing. It's just like not being in the same square box as everybody else. But as I started working with more other musicians, particularly string players, they hated it when I was like, "Yeah, we got to tune up." They're like, "Oh God, like my
Oh, I'm
instrument
sure.
sounds terrible when I tune it up to 444." And so I kind of stopped doing it after I started working with other people. I did it
Yeah,
for
that's why
years and years.
synthesizers are nice.
So you do that a lot?
Working in electronic music is awesome because you can create your own sonic environment that doesn't have to be limited by physical properties of instruments. And so there is an open playing field for tuning, for texture, timbre explorations. And yeah, I've been exploring 432 a bit. I've been also going to the solfeggio frequencies as well. The theory that each of our chakras has a specific musical frequency. Been interested in that theory. Curious about what other people think about it. Have you explored solfeggio frequencies at all?
I did a long time ago. I got into that's when I was doing my different tunings, and I got into trying to play with temperaments. If I remember correctly, that sort of what some people think is that came out of chanting, and it's sort of like that era of music, like medieval
Mm-hmm.
times. And that's where I started to get to a place where it's like, well, it certainly sounds beautiful, but I couldn't really say like whether that aligns to a particular chakra or not. It was more just like I have more of a viewpoint like all music is sound healing, so to speak. And we have this infinite spectrum of tones that I don't think one is better than another. I think to me, what's more interesting is like the ratios that you play with them, like how, and that's why I like to think about adding in musical elements that are essentially inherently imperfect, but can slide uh, into these relationships, like the voice, like a really amazing string section. I mean, that's really what they're doing if they've played together a long time, is they're playing with temperament, naturally.
Yeah, tension release, using the more complex ratios, settling into simple ratios, directly pulling on our heartstrings, creating tension, and settling into some sort of harmony. But I don't want to write off dissonance because I also, with the love of new music, especially and noise, I think there's a lot of power in dissonance. But I think, yeah, when we're talking about like healing frequencies, yeah, you're right. It's a lot about the ratios of notes between each other. Oh my goodness, I was just working on a vocal effect to try to emulate tube and throat singing, which was a really interesting research project.
Cool.
um, as you're exploring the harmonic series through your own voice and shifting your soft palette to create different harmonics throughout the series, and trying to do that through a vocoder. So yeah, the power of the human voice. I'm not used to using my voice in a musical way. I'm used to using my fingers as a composer, synth player. So that's been somewhat of a new process for me. It's a powerful thing though. It's definitely opening up my heart, my throat a bit more than I have been before. Maybe that's part of the evolution as I'm actually
Oh,
singing now.
yeah, I totally encourage you to keep singing because it's sort of this fundamental instrument that we all carry around, and it's almost like all musicians, whatever judgment they have around their voice or not, it's like singing should be an element of
So
their
much.
expression. All humans, really, but particularly someone like yourself that's already writing music. Like, what does it feel like when you're writing string parts with your fingers to sing them? It creates a natural phrasing too with your own breath. If you've ever tried that.
Totally. No, I think about singing a lot, but I've always just saying in my head. I haven't been actually vocalizing as much, and I didn't realize how much power there was. And so I started to do more of a. I've been doing this Buddhist practice for the last year, with Ethan Nichtern, son of David Nichtern, and
Yeah.
trying to get into a ritual of chanting, doing mantras, and um, I've never done that before in my life. It's been a totally new experience, and it definitely has been helping my anxiety. It's been helping me feel a sense of connection with my broader environment. And yeah, I think that's really important right now as we're all, so separated in our own digital worlds, that I can feel that sense of connection with others and something outside of myself. Um, do you practice mantras, and is that part of your ritualistic practice?
Not in a traditional sense. Radha, of course, likes singing actual kirtan and mantra and the Hanuman Chalisa. And for myself, it's more just singing as my own music and rehearsing. Like I'm usually rehearsing most days on some level or another. And it feels so good to sing and just to create. And even if I don't want to do it, it's like you're saying, after I do it, I feel a lot better. And there's something really special about the vibration in your body, in your head, and in your chest.
Mm-hmm.
And also, the regulation of breath that singing does in itself. It kind of, you take these nice breaths, and then you kind of, it's like putting your the air through a funnel coming out of you, and it creates these long exhalations. And as we know from yoga, like a longer exhalation typically is relaxing. It ignites that parasympathetic system. So it is inherently calming. It's actually a trick in psychedelic circles. If someone's having a hard time, is get them to sing something they know, like anything. It could be
Mm,
Twinkle Twinkle Little Star.
yeah.
But even, like, how people can sing things even when they've lost their mind through dementia. Sometimes that you play a certain song they knew from their past, and they can all of a sudden just start singing it, all the words.
Oh yeah.
You know,
Oh yeah. That's what's so fascinating about music is that we store it in a part of our brain that's directly related to emotion and memory, in our
yeah,
thalamus and part of our limbic system. There's something about music and emotion that is just always intrinsically connected. And yeah, you're right. Hearing a specific sound or a song might bring back a memory, and that's so powerful when you are working with patients that have dementia, or even just my own memory recall. You forget things, and then you're like, oh wow, that was my favorite song in the summer
right.
2009, and you're right back there, and it just lights up that part of your brain. um, it's pretty special. What does it all mean?
What was your favorite song in the summer of 2009? Putting you on the spot. I would never remember that. I have
I
no
don't
idea.
know. um, let's see. I was going to a lot of Todd P shows in Bushwick. I
Before
think it
Bushwick was Bushwick.
was
Yeah.
and before Bushwick was Bushwick. I was probably listening to The Crystal Cat by Dan Deacon. That was probably
Nice.
it. Um,
Nice. So I want to know what it is you're excited about moving forward. Not just, like, I mean, perhaps musically what you're working on, but maybe what you're hearing, but also sort of like the trends that we're feeling are emerging. Like, for instance, I'm a little bit biased because of the world I'm in, but it seems like a lot of people are getting into ambient music, and more and more interest in music as a healing force. Companies are getting into it. Various artists are kind of exploring it. I mean, some of it's just anecdotal of people I talk to, but even John Hopkins, when we were over in Austin, is sort of just saying how much he's enjoying going this direction with his music. And I'm like, great.
oh yeah.
What about yourself? What are you feeling and seeing out there?
Oh man, I think there's an awakening that's happening, but also a callback from the so-called first wave of interest in sound healing, and thinking about ambient pioneers like Brian Eno and Harold Budd and Laraji. That
Yeah.
whole scene really started a wave, and even the concept of like Muzak. I don't think that we'd have sound healing as we have it today if it wasn't for pioneers that really challenged us in our philosophy of how we think of sound. And it's really exciting. I think that also there's an awakening our awareness of the power of psychedelics, which I think has been affecting the way that people think or approach music as well. And I think we all are in need of community always, and collective healing, especially now. And it's psychedelics and ambient music is a wonderful path towards that, whether you're making it or enjoying it with others. So I'm pretty pumped about it. I We've lost so many ambient pioneers in the last year, so it's so sad. Like John Hassel passed away, Harold Budd, um, but homage to them, because we're carrying the torch forward and imagining new ways that ambient music can change hearts and minds. And you touched on the app part of things, and like the commercial application and like direct psychotherapy applications. And I think it's amazing that the power of sound and music is being looked at in a more clinical way. as to the so that we can actually put things through the scientific method and have statistics and data to study, that we can prove something that everybody already knew, that music can change hearts and minds. And I just think it's a really powerful time, and I think we're going to be seeing some new interesting finds of experiments through sound. I've been seeing all these weird new contraptions on my Instagram scrolls of like sound beds and vibrational experiences and color
Yeah.
and light therapy, which I'm totally into. And just seems like it's really coming into the collective consciousness. It seems to be less stigmatized, and it's wonderful. Let's have more of it. I would love to see. I'm really excited to see what the future is going to hold in terms of how we think of music, vibrations, color, this sort of multi-sensory experience as a powerful healing tool. Um, yeah. Do you get into light therapy at all? Is that something
Um,
that is of interest?
it's a little bit, it's of interest. It's a little bit outside my wheelhouse, other than when I'm playing live shows. I'm very interested in how the lights affect the experience. And I know it's a big part of it. But I haven't gotten into like me actually designing how that would all go. I used to travel. I still travel with some little lights that are. There's one I had for so many years. Eventually, I had to retire it. It broke so many times. I taped the entire thing with packaging tapes from all the airplanes that would crush it, and it just kept working. And someone gave it to me like a long time ago. Someone just handed me this light. I was like, thanks. And the next thing you know, I was like using it
Nice.
at every show. But I agree. I think I think light is just it's another like one of the elements that is a powerful way to play with what we are as human beings. But I did want to ask you, as you referenced this before, like how has the psychedelic experience informed your music or not?
Um, I feel like I didn't realize how much of psychedelic culture I was influenced by um, early on, before I even tried psychedelics. I was very drawn to vivid colors and more synesthetic approaches to things, cross senses. But when I started experimenting with psychedelics, I would I would love to write during mushrooms, and I did an experiment of microdosing for about a year and a half, which really
Whoa!
helped me through it
What
really helped me
what
through a lot
medicine?
of my internal stories. What medicine? Is that what you just said?
Yeah, like which medicine were you microdosing?
I was microdosing Golden Teacher, and I would had a very very small dose, 3 times a week for about a year when I
Mm.
was in Portland, and I was also hiking a lot in the mountains and exploring the Columbia River Valley and taking samples of nature and then going back to my studio and processing those samples and just thinking about how I am a part of that world, even if I feel separated, with my computer and my microphone and speakers, that I am part of that forest. I am part of that mountain, and to start exploring through electronics, what that might sound like in sort of a reimagined way. Um, I I love sci-fi, and so sometimes I have little sci-fi stories that accompany some of my music too. So it'll be exploring what life might be like on another planet, or if time functioned differently in this world, what would it be like? These sort of imagination practices, which I think psychedelics really helped to open up in me. But I had to get through a lot of these internal blockages first, which we all have them. Uh, Finding a place of self love, it's a consistent practice that I need to stay dedicated to. That's the
Mm.
part I keep getting tripped up on in my meta practice is showing yourself love before showing others love, and that steps of practicing loving kindness. And sometimes I always forget to start with that first self-love step. So yeah, psychedelics really helped me to find a place of self-love, and also explore transcendence of self, and integration into natural environments.
Have you ever used psychedelics as a method for listening to music, and have you had any particular powerful experiences listening to particular artists or music on psychedelics, or has it more been the other way around? The psychedelics are helping
Hmm.
you make music.
I've It's usually been a very active, like making music, or I'm out in nature just trying to dissolve into being a tree, basically. And just finding enough stillness where I am just observation. Um, I haven't really explored as much with, I mean, definitely like going to clubs and my techno days for sure. That was, those were slightly different substances, but different mindset. But there was still this sort of collective unity that you'd experience too, in moving your body in the same way and feeling that sort of pulsation. And um, yeah, just a sort of like depersonalization, collective consciousness experience when going to shows in particular, so those have been like my most powerful psychedelic experiences of listening.
Yeah. So how are you feeling? You're a very independent musician with so many different skills. Are you finding that you've charted a path for yourself that you're feeling hopeful about, or how do you feel it is these days to be not just an independent musician but a woman in music, making music in so many different ways?
Man, I forget that I'm a woman most days, so it doesn't really, it's only sometimes when people respond to me and I'm like, "Oh, okay, they're seeing me as different." So I think the otherizing is definitely a thing, but I try not to let it phase me. I've
Yeah.
definitely dealt with it enough in my life, but I've learned that that's other people's issues, and I'm just gonna keep on being myself. And yeah, I mean, as to whether I'm feeling hopeful or not, I mean, we work that stuff out in our songs, right? Sometimes I don't feel hopeful, and that's where you work it out through your music. And but at the end of the day, I think I'm an optimist, but I'm also an existentialist. So can you be an existential optimist? Is that possible?
Of course you can. Sure.
Yeah, I think that's kind of where I'm at. And I'm just trying to enjoy the flow. I've been starting to feed my visual art side, and trying to embrace even written word. And I'm doing this process called the Artist's Way with Julia Cameron. Have you ever done that book?
That is old school. Yeah, that is like the
Old
secret of,
school.
yeah, it is. It's the free
It's like the
writing, like
secret.
it is the secret, like, of tapping into your unconscious.
Totally. And thinking about what the creative impulse is, and trying not to put it into a box. And yes, I've had a career that's taken me down, music, sonic, sound design, but I can also be so many other things, and so can everybody else, and it's beautiful. There is that abundance there. So I've been starting to, yeah, do a little bit more visual work, and I just had a piece put out in a little collection called Medicine for a Nightmare that is paired with visual art and music. So it's like a zine, and then an audio compilation that goes along with it. So I'm starting to explore little ideas of multi-sensory concepts. I'm also really into immersive sound. I got to install a quad in this room. I started writing a
Really?
few quad pieces, and yeah, the environment isn't in stereo. You know, it's we're that's just the limitations of our speakers. If we were able to imagine writing music in more of an immersive way, how much more impactful could that be?
Well,
And I
you
was
know,
lucky enough to,
sorry, but a lot of people are into thinking about Atmos, Dolby Atmos, because Apple is integrating
yeah.
that into its system. And I think that's at least 11 speakers. And I've gone pretty deep in the last few weeks into learning about that. And one of the main things I come across is like, I don't know, 98, 9% of people, the way they're going to hear a Dolby Atmos mix is on AirPods, spatially sort of rendered down to two headphones. And I'm not saying that's terrible, but I am interested in doing things in spatial mixes, but I'm just curious how the consumer would end up hearing it. And it's probably going to be like fancier and fancier headphones that synthesize audio into what they're calling 3D to try to emulate it moving around you.
Yeah, totally. And I think probably the most new technology that can handle that sort of enhanced audio is in the gaming world.
Right.
Um, there's some. I mean, if have you ever tried gaming headphones before compared to music headphones? It's
No.
just completely different
What?
in how you perceive space and the way that they use sound design in a lot of um, video games. It's really fascinating and it really amplifies the storytelling too.
Wow, I had no idea gaming headphones were that
Uh huh.
dramatically different. I mean, that's something I got to look into because I think in the live space, you were talking about that piece you did with 80 plus speakers. I mean, that stuff's really cool and fascinating. You'd have to write a piece for that space, and I think that's really cool. And
Mm-hmm.
even if like I've been doing these ceremony concerts, which is essentially four speakers in the round, and I could do potentially a kind of quad mix in there, but this is a kind of frontier where I've said for years that I sense in my gut that we'll go from mono to stereo to 3D sound, 360 mixes. I'm just not quite sure technologically how that will look for the consumer, and I'm guessing it'll be headphones because no one's going to have a treated room, or very few people, with like 11 plus speakers in it, and then you sit in one place. I mean, everyone's so mobile, and the way we experience music and media
Mm-hmm.
is on the go, and it'll probably just continue to be that
Yeah.
way.
Yeah. Suzanne Ciani, one of the pioneers of quadraphonic sound, has come out with a new file format for quadraphonic pieces that can actually be downloaded from SoundCloud, which is amazing. So there's been a real push to for quad. I think that's like a next natural step for studio engineers, music makers. But yeah, I think you're probably right. It's the innovation's probably going to be in the headphone world.
Well, Apple has put their eggs in the Atmos basket, and they have a lot of power. So it's like they're really encouraging Atmos mixes, which is there's some technological limitations that make that relatively expensive to do. But it's interesting that that's what they're pushing hard is, for people to
Yeah.
deliver Atmos mixes, not just quad. I would be curious to know, like, if you delivered a quad mix, if their system would even give a shit, or if it would be like, yeah, we can kind of spatialize that. Or they're like, nope, it has to be Atmos or nothing. I don't know. I got to find out.
Oh, I'm just starting to learn about it at my work. Just learning about Atmos. So I'm excited. Maybe next time we talk, we can just jam on Atmos ideas. I'm just at the beginning. It sounds like you're scratching the surface too. It's great.
I've been having a
Wonderful.
lot of conversations about it with people because I'm exploring it, but there's these really it's just funny how some people are like really into it and some artists are like, "Oh, I tried it and I hated it," and some of them are like, "I loved it," or "Here's what I like, here's what I don't like. Here's how you mix in it, here's the technology you need. Then you have to master it." And there's all sorts of interesting pros and cons, but at the end of the day, it sounds like it's a really cool technology for sound design and movie production. Like we've experienced it where you're in a movie theater and like the sound of a car is moving. But when you come to music, it's a little
Mm-hmm.
different because without it being gimmicky, you don't just want to like have certain things moving around all the time. I mean, like, that's just okay. That's fun and all, but it's like how
Mm-hmm.
many constituent parts do you have to have? And if it's written in the Atmos space, then it would probably work well. But if it was written in a stereo space and you're trying to spatialize it, you're spreading out sounds, which then you get into all these phase issues, and it's hard to do, I think, really well. You have to know what you're doing.
Yeah. I've
Anyway,
been experimenting with like imagined environments and thinking about ecosystems and thinking about different levels of sound and height, and then also thinking about we have we use our echolocation with sound to perceive whether something's a threat or not to us, like the fundamentals of like what is sound communicating to us from an evolutionary perspective. And it's like, am I safe or am I not safe? And and then we
wow.
get to the really safe sounds like ASMR, really close and comforting mother sounds, really soft, maybe sensual, versus a large boom. And even like where in your body you feel these things too. Like I did this experiment with my students in Portland where we showed the frequency range of hearing, and we were trying to indicate like where in our body we were feeling things. And in the lower part of the frequency range, we all felt it like down in our intestines in the lower
In your
part of our
gut.
body. And as we
Yeah.
get to the higher, we feel it in our sinuses and our head. And so yeah, that's going back to like the solfeggio correlation of actual frequencies and specific locations within our body and what they're evolutionarily designed to do. It's really fun to think about, and then translating that into a sonic environment. Because even if you're just doing a G to a C back to a G chord, there's so much that can be communicated through that. And I think the proximity is really ultimately like safety, not safety, like how close, how far, what sort of space are you sensing that you're in, giving a sense of the reverb and surround is so much more potent than in stereo. So yeah, the track that is on this new compilation I actually wrote in quad, um,
Cool.
and it has a lot of imagined creature sounds that coming from an imagined ecosystem, from trees up above and valleys below, and trying to explore that through my spatial mixing.
Well, you're also talking about spaces. And when you feel music, it typically has to be on a system that's producing those bass frequencies for your body to hear. Like if it's coming from headphones, you're not going to have that physical sensation of a bass sound hitting you in the gut and vibrating your whole body. And also, like you
Totally.
talked about, vibrating in the room and how the room, the architecture of the space is, which is how it's been for all of humanity essentially, is like sound is in a space, whether it's a canyon or a room or a cave or, and these are things we don't want to lose because the quality of that sound and the full spectrum of it, we're designed to experience that. And I think a lot of people miss that when they think about what an artist can create or any music can be. It can be a full body experience. In essence, it's really what it is, but we truncate it down a lot of times to just a headphone mix, which is emotional and sort of inside our head, which is super cool, but we're missing out on some of those other levels of the experience.
Oh, I know it. I went to a show for the first time in a while, and I just like I wanted to go up and hug the subwoofer. I missed it so much. Um, it's you want those frequencies, you want that power. Oh my goodness! Before I left Portland, I saw one of the most amazing shows. It was put on by Sima Space, which is an organization to uplift artists who are deaf or hard of hearing, and they did this exhibit show in an art gallery, which was surround subwoofers, like huge stacked subwoofers, and you could hold a balloon that had an LED in it. And so you could feel the vibrations of the bass frequencies. It was a concert only for subs. And then they had
Wow.
sound reactive lights. Unfortunately, somebody did blow their eardrum out. Um, but, uh, but it was a really powerful experience to think about how we experience these frequencies besides our ears, how we feel them in our bodies, and yeah, we listen with our whole being.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, I mean, we've touched on so many different aspects of sound and music, and there's so many more, and I feel like it's just expanding right now in this state of creativity and experimentation and collaboration. And that's one of the things with the pandemic is it's shown us how we can collaborate remotely. And I'm just grateful that we got to do the work we did, and the work hopefully we'll do in the
Me too.
future. Yeah. And so thank you for
Yes.
continuing to share your amazing gifts with the East Forest world.
Ah, it was meant to be. I'm so happy that our paths have been parallel over the last couple of years, and I'm so happy to see everything that's been opening up in your career. I'm just really grateful that we've had these collaborations.
Well, me too. Me too. Is there what's the best way for people to keep track of all things Lorna Dune, or listen to your music or otherwise?
Oh, and self promotion is a tricky thing as an artist, but it probably Instagram or my website would probably be the best place to keep up. I have a lot of unreleased things that I'm going to be releasing in the next year, which I'm very excited about, that are a bit more on the vocal exploration, drone, experimental, not in, Western equal temperament tonality. This next year, so maybe keeping an eye on Bandcamp, as that's the best platform to support artists as well.
Okay. I'll drop some of those links in the show notes. And you do have some excellent music out there too from the past. So I encourage people to find it on Spotify and jam out. And there's, lots of things you've done with us too, including a remix on the Held Kindred album that I think that comes to mind right away. That's one of my favorites is the remix of the Held song. Um, it's so
Oh, I
great.
love that one.
Yeah.
That was a fun one.
Yeah. It's such a great vibe. Um, but it's been a joy, getting to dig into some of this stuff. I love nerding out on it and learn more about your own process. So thank you.
Thanks. I'm always down to nerd out about sound and all of its implications.